Right.
It's recorded on computer, and then I'll post it on Google Drive with the
Yep.
permission.
Sounds good. Perfect.
Fantastic.
How are
Excellent.
you doing today?
I'm very good. I'm very, very good. Um,
Awesome.
I've had I had an interview this morning, and I was supposed to have another one right after that, but it's been pushed to next week. And I have to say,
Um,
I'm pretty happy because three interviews in one day, it's a lot.
it's a lot. It's a lot of work. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is a
yeah.
lot. It is a lot.
Agreed.
Shall we start?
Yeah,
Excellent.
let's go.
So just to reset a little bit the context, you know, starting straight away into it, what I like to do in the beginning is just for record, like so we have it on record. Maybe
Yep.
if you can introduce yourself, your background, and what you've been doing, that led you to FinOps.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm Dieter Mason. I've been doing cloud FinOps since 2013 at companies like Google, Netflix, Intuit, and most recently Roku. I'm also one of the FinOps ambassadors of the FinOps Foundation.
Fantastic. Do you have any unusual hobbies? It's an article that is a spotlight. So, we need a little bit of an anchor, a need of an unusual. Do you have any fun hobbies? Do you have any activities that would actually, trigger the audience?
Yeah, we do a lot of hiking, which isn't unusual. And we like also snorkeling and horseback riding, which maybe is also not unusual. But then we also do cave exploration. So
Wow.
that is maybe a little bit more on the unusual side, and where we have gear with like ropes and carabiners and headlamps and those kind of things, right? We can go into caves, and it's essentially sort of like going on a hike, but you need to do some climbing.
You know, in the narrative, in the editorial line, you can expect the metaphor into going deep and explore, that will for sure, show up.
Yeah,
And that's how we connect the audience to the practitioner, to the interviewee. So
exactly.
excellent. Do you do that? So where do you do that? I'm so sorry. Are you flying to places or?
No, it's within California. There's a couple of places like Pluto's Cave is one that people like a lot. Um, it's close to Mount Shasta, to the north of Mount Shasta, and that is one that is fun. We were in a situation where we were rappelling from ropes, and we were out of rope, and I couldn't see the bottom, so we decided to turn around.
And last question, just for my and for my benefit more than anything else. So you guys have cave systems over there? Is it more like stalactites, stalagmites type of cave,
It's all
or is
kinds of
it more
things,
like
yeah.
going deep and like
It's all kinds of things, right? Usually, most commonly, they are lava tubes, right? Where lava at some point went through that and carved out a. Those things can be very large, in the sense of like maybe like a highway tunnel, so huge structures, right? And you can walk around in them. And then there's areas where you can go deeper or higher and those kind of things. So it's a lot of fun. There's also some locations where there's essentially a mountain that is collapsing, and the huge blocks created a cave system that you can explore.
fantastic? Excellent. Um, I wasn't expecting something as exciting as that. So I'm really happy I asked. Excellent.
It's not that exciting. You're really progressing carefully, right? And you plan ahead, and get maps and those kind of things. So it's more of like a cautious exploration
Yes.
kind of thing.
Excellent. Okay, let's do a bit of a funnel, directional
Yep.
discussion. You mentioned being a FinOps ambassador. Um, there's not too many of you guys, and you have like a sort of a unique perspective. um, interacting with everyday practitioners, but also having the expert knowledge stamped by the foundation. Um, how do you explain FinOps to the various audience you may be interacting with, and who are those audience? How do you explain FinOps to them?
I mean, it's different, I think, when you talk to an engineer versus leadership, right? But fundamentally, FinOps is a culture shift where cost becomes another dimension that you want to optimize. FinOps is not about saving every dollar in the cloud or on technology. FinOps is about getting the most out of every dollar that you invest.
Okay, and do you encounter unexpected misconception about FinOps?
Yeah, I mean, there are situations where people are, especially once you go and interact with the finance world, right? They are more spreadsheet driven, more data driven. And you quickly learn that having accurate data is important for these conversations, right? And because cloud cost can be it's a dollar amount, but there is different types of dollar amounts on how you measure it, right? Is it, for example, public pricing or list pricing, right? That is what everyone is paying. Do you get an enterprise discount, and how do the cloud costs shift with that enterprise discount? And it can be service-specific discounts as well, right? So that on some services you get discount A, on other services you get this discount B, and the discounts can be very widely. So there can be a great discrepancy between those discounts, which then results in different strategic decisions, right? And then there is something called commitments in the cloud. That is when you go to a cloud provider and you say, hey, I'm going to use this virtual machine over the next 3 years. And the cloud provider is then willing, because you are entering this commitment with that cloud provider, and it's a binding commitment, they are willing to extend discounts. For 1 year, it's typically 34%. For 3 years, it's typically somewhere around 54%, right? So it's half off. It's quite substantial. And then do you express this dollar amount having these additional discounts as well, right? And then how do you quantify savings and how do you quantify optimizations, right? Let's say you have a workload that is, $5,500 a day, let's say, and the engineer does an optimization, and the optimization brings it down to, let's say, $850 a day. So quite a substantial optimization. Do you credit the engineer until December 31st of the savings, right? Do you credit them for 12 months? So if they do it on July 1st, it expires in June 31st next year, right? Or June 30th next year. So how do you represent those savings? And especially as you go into the finance teams, they always have certain policies and rules and governance on how to handle those things. And it's different from organization to organization, how that is handled.
Mhm. That's absolutely true. In fact, this morning, so being sort of FinOps Foundation approved, stamped, and in fact, we had this morning a FinOps Foundation call where JR laid off the 2026 roadmap. Um,
Exactly.
Big push towards the frontier, right?
Yeah.
Now FinOps go way beyond cloud to IT to the outer skirt of IT real estate. We're talking about on-prem, we're talking about SaaS, we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking shifting left and right and up, where the
Mhm.
discussion now reaches executive level. There's a lot of outreach that FinOps is headed towards.
Yeah.
So the foundation is very much forward-looking.
Mhm.
Do you see the wide community of FinOps practitioner, the market in general, um, training off compared to where the foundation is taking us towards? Where is the learning curve at these days?
So there are, I think, two forces that are at play. One is that the vast majority, as of 2019, which is a very old data point that Andy Jassy shared during reInvent, 95% of all information technology or all IT was still done in data centers, right? So when you go to like a state level, a county level, a city level, all this government, they're actually used to operating in data centers and they are slowly shifting into the cloud. So a phenomenon that JR shared with me two conferences ago, so that was in 2024, is that he wants that the practitioner base is maturing from crawl across walk into the run maturity, right? But he doesn't see the practitioner base achieving that maturity. And I think one of the reasons of that is that we have new people or new organizations arriving in the cloud, right? And for them, the cloud is a new thing, a new medium, right? It is very different to a data center. And so they start at the crawl maturity and then they will mature over time. But since we have this constant influx, and now the FinOps Foundation has, I'm not sure how many members it is. I think it's well over 50,000 members worldwide, right? So that it is a fairly large body of people. There is a constant influx of those newcomers to the cloud and wanting to start doing FinOps, right? So we have that phenomenon happening, but we also have the phenomenon that the FinOps Foundation needs to accommodate as well, that we now have FinOps practitioners that have 8+ years of experience, right? With me having done this since 2013, so I have a very large time frame of practices to look back to, right? And the foundation needs to also cater to these more advanced users and use cases, right? And this is where we are seeing that once you sort of work with the cloud and you do a good job there, what happens is that leadership will reach out and ask, hey, can you help us with other things? That happened with me as well, right? Where I took over vendor management in a sense, right? So like a business operation manager position, right? Where the Cloud Center of Excellence had over 40 vendors and they were managed decentralized by individual line managers or directors. And I offered that I can probably streamline that by centralizing that into one role and then getting better holistic discounts that way, right? Because each manager has many other things to work on. They can't focus on just negotiating a specific contract, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be software as a service or licensing, right? Which are scope expansions of the original scope of cloud. There's other scope expansions that I see, which is that you want to apply FinOps to private cloud, right? So maybe you have a data center, and within the data center, you're running VMsphere or some kind of virtualization technology, right? And you want to apply FinOps to that area as well. And I see, for example, at my current organization, we actually took a look at would it make sense to, there's certain portions of our data strategy that run on a daily basis, and they are sort of in maintenance mode, right? There's no active development done on those data pipelines anymore, right? They exist until they are going to be retired. So if there is an error and the data pipeline has to restart, in the cloud, this incurs an additional cost because now you spend virtual machines or compute for a certain duration, And if you have to restart, that duration essentially doubles or increases substantially, right? So could we move that into a data center? Would that make sense, right? So we did actually a study in late 2024 where we looked at what would be the ROI or the return on the investment. And it's typically not a short-term benefit that you're getting. These kinds of projects have typically an ROI that is around the 7-year mark. So those are very long-term projects, but that also means that FinOps would extend into the data area, into the data center area, right? Essentially data lake or data processing. And in the last 3 years, with the rise of large language models and generative AI, we have seen that there is sort of an explosion of applications of that generative AI, not just internally to save some time, right? Instead of if I see a long vendor email that is like a page long, I will just ask some large language model to summarize that and have the key commercial highlights for me pointed out, right? So that I see they are maybe buried somewhere in the text, but I want them highlighted and I want to see if they match my requirements or my request. So FinOps also is extending now into that generative AI or into just general AI area, and where we see what we can do through optimizations, through those commitments, right? Where you make a longer term commitment and where an experiment is being productionalized, and during that you do the optimization and you apply additional savings. So I see that there is a constant influx of FinOps practitioners that are starting. So they're starting sort of at the bottom, at the crawl maturity, right? But I also see that there is a need for the FinOps scope to expand into areas other than cloud, into technology in general. And additionally, I think it is a good idea that JR and the foundation is also pushing for more of an executive involvement, right? Because many times I talk to other FinOps practitioners where we just have a conversation and they don't present or they don't interact with executive leadership at all, which is mind-boggling to me, because how do you get your goals? How do you know that you're performing toward your goals? If I set my own goals, I will always be 110%, right? But if someone else is setting my goal, now I have something to strive, something to work toward. So getting that executive buy-in is key, because you need to be able to, in a situation, let's say we have production outage because the engineer didn't follow a tagging standard, for example, right? You need the executive to say like, well, you should have followed the tagging standard, instead of saying like, why do we have such strict tagging policies, right? So you need that executive understanding to know and drive what is important here for the business, and that FinOps is not sort of like an optional thing and we forget about it when things get hairy, but you adhere to FinOps through good and bad times as well.
Excellent. So we'll get back to executive sponsorship in a second. I just want to double click on what you said about FinOps expanding to other areas of technology. Do you think so? Obviously, there are probably other areas that are closer to the cloud mindset for which the FinOps principle probably applies seamlessly, like
Yep.
a private data center, for instance. But when we're talking about SaaS infrastructure or other areas that are not specifically usage-based and cost and consumption and things like that, do you feel that the framework we have in FinOps applies seamlessly to and can encompass all areas of technology? Do you think we have to develop new framework? Is that a bit of a hybrid of both? What's your
No.
perspective?
So the framework has, I believe, a new capability was added this morning. So it should have now 23 capabilities, if I'm not mistaken. but not every capability will apply to each scope, right? And things like allocation to know whose neck to choke, right? If you have, let's say, a cost anomaly, I need to identify quickly who is the engineer, who is the engineering leader, and I need to inform them, hey, we have this cost anomaly, right? So unfortunately, I have a little bit of the reputation that I will only bother you if something catastrophic is happening, right? Which also gives me the benefit that people will listen when I reach out to them and say, hey, we have this problem and we need to start looking into this problem right away, right? Things like, $20,000 an hour. It's possible, right? In the cloud is phenomenally scalable. So it is quite possible that we have these types of anomalies, right? And um, when it comes to other areas, some of these apply as well, like allocation, right? You need to know, let's say you have a Datadog, you have a New Relic, you have a Splunk, who are the owners of these and how much do they use, right? Um, and you also need a little bit more familiarity with what does the team look like behind that usage, right? Because you could have a substantial usage, and of course, if there is fluctuations in usage, you get anomalies that are also substantial. And it happened to me once where I reached out to the engineering leader, and I was a little bit strong-worded with that this needs to be taken care of immediately, right? And I didn't realize that that was a team of two, right?
Yeah.
So you need to also know that context, right? I was thinking maybe I'm talking to a team of like 20 or 200 or something like that, and it was a team of two. So they had limited available time to look into those things. So yeah, I don't think we need a new framework. I just think that we need to understand how to apply the framework to different scopes, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
And so maybe one corollary question to that is we have different frameworks existing from ITAM, TBM, ITFM, FinOps. Do you see that as competing frameworks, or is there one that will take the lead over the others? How do you see those different frameworks coexist in the future?
That's a good question, but I think they will coexist, right? ITAM has a certain mission statement that is different from the FinOps mission statement, like to get the most value out of our investment, right? And to make sure that the practitioner body is trained and knowledgeable. So those are different things, and there's other frameworks like you could do a look at the Scrum framework or a DevOps framework or a waterfall framework, right? They are all apply for different things, right? Um,
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't apply FinOps to when I do grocery shopping because it doesn't necessarily make sense to buy toilet paper for 3 years.
Yes.
That will, for one, be probably a fire hazard, and for another, have a large volume that needs to be stored. So we have seen that at the beginning of COVID, right? That some people didn't quite connect the dots and did impulsive purchases. And so it doesn't lend itself everywhere, right? It does a great job with cloud in other areas, technology areas. But these other frameworks, they are good for, let's say, having a fast development cycle, right? To get those people to be in a stand-up, right? And the reason for it to be in a stand-up, first, it's early in the morning, hopefully, and the people are actually standing. The reason is they don't want to be standing for long, right? So that expedites that makes that meeting hopefully shorter than like a half hour or an hour meeting. So there is purposes for these frameworks as well, and they complement each other.
Excellent. Okay. Interesting. You mentioned AI. You mentioned AI in the context of the latest announcement of the FinOps Foundation. AI is prominent everywhere. Um, I think it's not divulging trade secret to say that AI ROI is still a bit of a fuzzy concept. Um, what's your view on that? And more practically, do you have in mind any practical example when AI clearly pays for itself? Have we come across those type of examples?
I think the most foundational one that I see is that using AI in your day-to-day work, you can summarize things, you can ask it for ideas. Like for example, I just built a website for a hobby of mine, and it was pretty sparse. And then I fed that thing to AI and said like, can you give me some other ideas of things that I could add? And it mentioned like community highlights and those kind of things that I didn't initially think of, right? So it is in a sense creative in the boundaries that it has, but I can definitely I will formulate an email reply, and if I feel it's too clunky, it's like maybe two paragraphs or something, I will run it through AI and have it shorten it, right? Make it more crisp and to the point, right? And in that, it helps immensely. When writing code, I have seen that, for example, when you ingest an RSS feed, everyone should be kind of familiar with that, right? Those are news feeds, and you ingest them. They can come in different formats. One is JSON, and the other one is an Atom XML format, right? Um, when I wrote the RSS feed parser myself for JSON, it's about half a page of code, and I know what every single line does, right? And so in interview, you could point to a line and say, like, what does this do? And I would be able to answer it to you. But now I'm able to use Claude and have it write an Atom XML DOM parser, which is a page and a half of code. And I have no idea what it does, but I copy and paste it and it works. And that is probably didn't exist in this form even a year ago, right? That you literally copy and paste that thing and it works out of the box, right? And you can even ask follow-up questions and have it adjust things. So I'm now able, especially when it comes to writing code, I'm able to tackle problems that I would have avoided like the plague 3 years ago, right? Just because writing a DOM parser is no fun, and operate on maybe a higher level without knowing the details, which is an interesting insight, right? I can do more sophisticated things, but I don't really know how it works.
So mm, that's something that is recurring in AI related conversation. Lots of people say there is benefit, there are productivity gain to be
Yes,
had with AI. And I think the little bridge between productivity gain and return on investment is the fact, and there's a lot of sometimes um, misalignment because people sometimes take productivity gain for return on investment. But and there is my question, and asking for your perspective on that. Given the fact that productivity gains are obvious at an
yeah,
individual or even at a corporate level,
yes,
but since this enablement exists everywhere, which essentially makes the competition fierce, and
yes,
therefore the output produced certainly easier and faster for everyone.
yeah,
But because of the multiplicity of output, because AI is available everywhere to anyone,
right,
the actual value of this output has gone down drastically. And therefore, I think there is the ROI problem. I have a media platform. I'm
yeah,
doing things today I wouldn't have been able to do 5 years ago. I'm
exactly,
producing, content but so is the 30 or 40 or 50 other people doing exactly the same because they have the same enablement. And
And I
what's your
feel that
perspective on the plethora of content output, new developments, new features available?
I feel that especially if you use it to provide to create text output, right? Text content, like on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, right? You can tell that the text seems to be longer than if you have to type it yourself, right? You can tell immediately. And there's other things like ChatGPT likes to use M dashes and the word crucial, right? There's not something that crucial is not something that humans typically use. Maybe if you are like, airplane maintenance or like nuclear maintenance, right? The word crucial shows up, but in colloquially, not so much.
Right,
So you can tell from these, but you can also tell that the content seems to be longer and less of a soul,
correct.
if I may say that, right? It seems kind of empty. Claude is maybe a little bit more spicy than that, right? But just a hair compared to ChatGPT, which seems to be really soulless and just walls of text creating content generator, right? I think when it comes to businesses, their ROI is typically defined by some key performance indicators or KPIs. We use multiple KPIs. We have, of course, active accounts. We have cost per streaming hour. We have cost per operating system supported, and many others. So one of the examples where we have a customer-facing AI solution is that you can now talk to your remote control, right? So you have some movie on the screen, right? And you can ask your remote control simple questions, things like, what is the maturity rating for that movie, right? That is something that you can probably look up on your phone anyways, right? But you can ask more sophisticated questions. Can you recommend a similar movie with less violence? And
Right.
that is a capability that we really didn't have. And that is again leveraging that creativity, but in a very limited scope, right? I just want one recommendation instead of write me an article about FinOps, right? And then you have to wait for the soulless text content that is not so useful. And by the way, this talking to your remote control, this can be substantiated in customer retention, right? We do A/B testing, and then out of that we get like let's say 1.1% better customer retention, right? And that we can then convert into a dollar value. And if that dollar value is larger than your AI investment, then you get a scaling factor, right? And so you're looking for like a 2x, 3x. Those are good returns on investment. An excellent return on investment is like 7x, 15x, right? Those are fantastic. And poor return on investments like 1.2, 1.5, something like that. You're still getting something, but it's not at that super scale.
So customer signals remain
Yeah,
the North Star for
absolutely.
for investment validation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you think we're over investing in AI?
No, when we did last October, we did the budget for 2026. I can't really say how much we allocated to AI, but let's say it was 5% or less of our cloud spend. So it is a very conservative investment. Now that was something across 30 different projects. So some of the projects were like, in the tens of thousands of dollars. Some of the projects were in the low millions of dollars, right? So they vary quite substantially, but we are conscious about that, right? And we make sure that we ask the people who suggested the projects to quantify what is the affected business outcome, right? And either it could be like an increase in streaming hours, it could be a reduction in the cost of streaming hours, could be an increase of active accounts, those kind of things.
Okay, thank you. So to maybe broaden the scope a little bit on AI, do you have any opinion on societal impact and maybe corporate impact of the new methodology that AI introduces today?
Um, there are still some areas where I can't really use AI. I tried. For example, we had when you engage with a vendor and you onboard the vendor, there's something called a master service agreement, right? And in that master service agreement, you outline things like what happens if there's a data breach, what happens if an indemnification clause, and many other such things that govern when certain catastrophic events happen, right? Or maybe even less than catastrophic. And the AI did a great job, and it does generally, like when I have to sign an NDA, like you and I have not signed an NDA. This is why we don't talk about anything that is covered by NDAs. But I ask the AI, hey, review this thing and give me your thoughts. A typical one is that an NDA would be indefinite, which I don't want because in 20 years, the technology that I worked on today is probably well outdated, right? So why would it still be covered by an NDA? So I typically want that NDA to have like a shorter time period, like maybe 2, 3 years, right? And so when I asked the AI to review the master services agreement, it helps me to get an initial understanding of where that thing is, right? But one thing that it didn't cover is that it didn't, and maybe it's because it has difficulties with numbers, right? Interestingly enough, that for the payment clause, my organization prefers a net 60 payment when we have to pay you, right? We want 60 days so that we keep a larger cash flow on hand, right? However, the MSA had the typo and it said net 6.
Net
And
6,
so
not six, not 60, just 6.
just 6 days, right?
Okay,
Like not even a week.
that's
So,
an
and
expensive typo.
that's an expensive typo, right? And that thing was already sent for signatures, and actually the vendor lawyer saw that and pushed it back and said, like, you guys probably want to fix that, right? And
Nice.
so I do see limitations where it can be used, right?
Yeah.
But I also see upsides, like whenever, I'm getting older, right? Everyone is, but I'm definitely getting more towards the retirement. And whenever I have like some health issues, I go and ask like ChatGPT or something like that, right? Um, Compared to um, when I had to schedule a Zoom call with a doctor, and the problem that I had by the time I had the Zoom call 6 weeks later, it vanished. I didn't have that problem anymore. So
Yeah.
I joined the Zoom conversation. I said, like, I don't know what to tell you, right? I had some hip pain in my joint, and now it's long gone.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here, but I wish you would have been here sooner, right? So I think for these kind of use cases, we haven't seen that interestingly enough, and maybe because there is a legal threshold that needs to be overcome, that someone builds like an Airbnb for doctors, right? Where the doctors are essentially automated and you get an initial reply. And then if you need a prescription drug or something like that, right, you actually get connected to a doctor, right? We haven't seen that yet. 3 years have passed and no one has done that. So there must be some substantial legal hurdles to pull this off compared to, let's say, Uber and Airbnb, right? That displace taxis and hotels. We haven't seen that done for the healthcare sector or the legal sector, right? There could be also something like, hey, I have this NDA, I need quick advice, right? If I have a lawyer, but that guy is $800 per hour, right? So if I have like a 3-page NDA, do I really want, and maybe the lawyer, they bill actually by the minute, right? Maybe they only need like 30 or 45 minutes, so it won't be like, it will be like $400 or something like that, right? But it's still quite substantial. Plus, it takes hours or days for the lawyer to come back to me and with recommendations. While running this thing through ChatGPT is 5 seconds later, I have a rough outline, right? So I do see that there is, different ways of using this in different applications. And I also see that in the industry, we haven't seen those things yet. So there must be other hurdles that are preventing those startups.
So I agree that at the corporate level, there is still some due diligence, legal requirement, industry regulation. It might be the case where it will come from the base, from consumers themselves.
Yeah,
Private consumers have been drafting lease contracts with
yeah,
their AI and have really asked about medical advice to the point
yeah,
where we hear all those stories about people being emotionally attached to their AI to the
yeah,
point where they release a new version and
yeah,
they,
yeah.
they experience as a disconnection and a lot of anxiety. So
And
eventually,
I
like the
think
society will actually live that up and probably
you're absolutely right. And that was astonishing, right? Because we now, when you look at like Twitter and Reddit, right, the problem is that someone who is happy is not going to post, hey, I'm still happy, right?
yeah,
It's only the person that is really upset that is going to post, right? And even if you get like 20, 30 of those posts, what's the user base of OpenAI, right? Hundreds of millions of people, right? One of the fastest, well, second fastest now to OpenClaw, right? One of the fastest applications to grow ever. So yeah, you get like 30 Reddit posts of people being unhappy about that. But on the other hand, I think there are some very important potential societal changes, right? And we have seen that in the movie Her, right? That actually OpenAI got some into some trouble because they initially reused the voice of the actor. It
so,
was not the actual actor; it was just someone who sounded like an Elvis Presley imitator, right?
right.
Who sounded very similar to that actor's, but they still discontinued that voice. Funny enough that there's other solutions out there like the Pi agent that still uses that voice, but it's not that large of a customer base, so the actors didn't find out about that and didn't threaten to sue them. So, but being able to talk to a friend at any time when you need it, I think is extremely powerful, right? I don't know if ChatGPT is there, right, or if Claude is there, right? Because we have actually seen that in the demo. Was it the figure robot where when you ask it to make coffee for you, it has trained making coffee in like 40,000 kitchens, right? In a simulation, right?
Right, sure.
It doesn't matter if it's marble countertop or Formica, if it's wooden cabinet or glass cabinet. It knows how to operate in a kitchen, but it has to look for that bloody coffee every single time you ask it to make coffee because it doesn't have memory, right? So
Yeah.
it literally starts opening the cabinets. Oh, here's the coffee, right? And tomorrow you ask it, it starts opening the cabinets. Oh, here's the coffee, right? And those are problems that we haven't tackled yet, right? So that friend should know a little bit about me. Am I married? Do I have children? What sicknesses do I have? What medications do I take, if any? And what food preferences, what hobbies I have, and those kind of things, right? And so it should be able to carry a conversation, not just over hours, but also days, weeks, years. And we don't have this is why we have a context window. You can actually install LM Studio on your laptop and run GPT OSS locally, right?
Sure.
And then there you can then modify the context window. and you can experiment with that, right? And you can ask it a question. If I put a marble into a cup and put the cup upside down on a table, and then I move the cup into a microwave, where's the marble? So there's, depending on that context window, right? A GPT will actually assume that a cup means a styrofoam cup with a lid on it, right? Which we intuitively, because we know this is like a puzzle of some sort, right? That can't be it, right? No human being would assume it's one of those styrofoam cups that you get at the movie theater, right? Um, but if you, for example, tell it in the context window that this is a porcelain coffee mug, then it will say, okay, the marble is on the table, right? But
Yeah.
if you don't specify that, if the context window is too short, where it can't look at the instruction what you gave it prior, it will assume it's a styrofoam cup and the marble is now in the microwave because the cup is an enclosed device.
Absolutely. But yeah, generally available to the public or for your everyday users, people will actually use new chat windows, no context. But I know certainly I mean, memory is definitely something that I care about. And when you deploy LLMs on, locally, uh,
Yeah.
yes, we point to a wiki, but we also need to point to a folder system that retains
Yes.
the information. Also, one of the
Yes.
problem is that if you're having weeks or month-long conversation with your AI, you're gonna burn through tokens like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah. And one interesting observation that you also do when you run the LLM locally is if you increase the context window, you can actually see your memory allocation
Yeah,
increase as it allocates the memory, right? So a lot of people are not even aware that, I mean, I don't know how the LLM works, right? I just know the effect of increasing the context
yeah,
window now using up all the memory of my laptop. And so the context window has something to do with the memory that the LLM is using, right? And the people like even last year, they said like, oh, Google will come out with like infinite context window, right? I'm not super sure if the current technology even is capable of doing that because you would need a fairly hefty amount of memory. Like we're talking about terabytes or possibly petabytes of memory, right? Which is just technically maybe not feasible because every user would need this, right? But the context window is what allows the LLM to carry
right.
a conversation. You can do a very short context window and it will lose its brain.
Yes.
Every 3 sentences, it will completely forget what you were talking about.
Mhm.
And then it will give you a generic answer that is based on your last input, right? Not based on the thread of the conversation.
Correct. Absolutely. My last question, as I see we're going on in time, we've brushed up all the benefits of AI. Um, what is your opinion on what we've been hearing lately from developers heavily using AI in their new remits, especially in the context of those big tech having laid off a lot of their workforce in the development space, and extra pressure on the remaining developers who've been actually using AI very successfully,
Yeah.
literally shortening their development cycles.
Yes.
But they report after a year of AI reaching a certain level of maturity in development function,
Yes.
some sort of burnout due to having no limits as to what they can do. And
Yes.
therefore, things they used to do in weeks now takes hours, and
Yes.
therefore taking on this ever-growing pipeline of new
Yes.
features and developments, not knowing when to stop, being completely sucked in the wire of AI development assistant, right? If you see
Yeah.
what if you've been reading this literature, what's your take on it? The downside of it being overpowering of AI and being virtually limitless, but essentially burning through the function.
You know, last week there was a user on Reddit that posted that they felt guilty about sleeping too much because they could accomplish so much more if they keep using AI, right? So you need to realize that our human body does need sleep, right? And certain types of sleep is also required, right? Um, and like REM sleep, and that's what I'm alluding to. And we need to do other things like eat, drink, sleep, use the restroom, those kind of things. And we need things to clear our head as well, right? There is a mental stability, right, that is required as well, where you have to maybe go for a walk, and stop thinking about that. Think about something else. Think about something that's fun. But I also saw pictures of this person that had 6 Mac Minis, and each Mac Mini was running OpenClaw for a different employer. And he used those tape printers where he had those little tapes with like the name of the employer on each Mac Mini, you know? So yeah, I mean, let's say you take like a job that can be relatively automated, like, approving invoices, approving insurance claims, those kind of things, right? Where you have a set of guidelines and the LLM can perform that job really well. And maybe, you only get paid like 120 or 140,000, right? But now you have 6 of those jobs, right? And you're getting an annual total compensation of over 800,000, right? And again, you don't need to connect to those Mac Minis. You can use a messenger app like Telegram or WhatsApp or Discord even, right? For those things, hey, I have this insurance claim here that is sort of borderline, right? And you custom instructions say, hey, reach out to me on Telegram if something can go both ways. And then, it drafts the decision and you select one of the options on your phone, right? So that is possible today, and I have seen it. It's not very widespread, but I think
I mean, the news related that dude that actually essentially racked up 5 or 6 developers' job concurrently.
yes,
Uh, Obviously, was in breach of contract because he was not allowed, right?
exactly.
But I think he became famous and probably something good came
Yes.
out.
I mean, you get fired faster than you will be able to comprehend, right?
Yeah,
If someone
yeah.
found out. But yeah, I mean,
But he's got a book deal now, so it's
yes.
okay.
But I think when it comes to the use of AI in like maybe 10, 20 years from now, right? When we maybe have a near infinite context window, when that thing can actually organize memory, because I have memories from when I was, a small child. Maybe I don't remember the colors, but I remember the circumstances of the situation, right? Um, so it's not like a video feed, right? But I remember the principles. And so if we can structure the memory to that's like sort of degrade over time, but the key concepts still being sticky, right? Um, I can see that there's applications like, for example, someone asked me, what if you don't have to do your grocery shopping anymore, right? Your household will have a $20,000 robot that will go out to the Uber or the Amazon van that is also automated, right? Pick up your 2 bags of groceries and start stocking them in the fridge and your cupboards, right? And your pantry. Um, but maybe that is the only human interaction that that person has, to go into the grocery store and say hi to the cashier. So we will see those things, and I think we have seen that actually over the last 20 years, where I see that small children, they get tablets put into their stroller, right? And they intuitively, thankfully, that technology is quite intuitive, where even children can figure that out, to the point where I don't know if you saw that video of the kid being at the doctor's office and trying to swipe on a magazine. right?
Yeah.
Because that's what they were used to. I mean,
Yes.
that kid is like 5 years old, right? You can't hold it against trying to do that because that's what they were doing with their iPad or whatnot, right? But we do see those societal changes happening, and we will see more of those, right? Where there is a disassociation between the humanity and the technology, and we need to actively do something to retain that human element, having these deep conversations, right? And now I do surveys where I'm talking to a bot, you know?
Sure.
And, someone recorded a video. Hey, I'm the guy that is running the survey. I'm a real person, but I can't do 50 of those surveys, of those interviews that we are conducting, right? A day. That will be too much. So I'm having a bot do them for me, right? So that's something that I have seen as well, right? And we need to bring that human element back. And also understand that, yes, this LLM has the knowledge of the entire internet from like 2 years ago, which probably no human being has. But it also has the maturity of a teenager, you
You're
know?
being optimistic.
It's a
That's very
PH
maturity.
level teenager, right? And hence that example with the cup and the marble, right? You use those simple examples and it can't work its way past it, right? Generally, when I ask the large language models, what are some good people that I should have conversations with? It doesn't hesitate to suggest dead people, right? Because it just doesn't have a concept of that person is no longer here, you
Yeah.
know? So I think the technology needs to mature substantially. I think we will get there. And when we get there, we will see more societal changes, right? If I can talk to a friend at any time of the day, why do I need real friends? They are so slow. You know, the, the large language model, maybe I can put it on like 1.5 speed when it talks, right? To be actually, visually impaired people do that, right? If you
Yeah.
have ever seen that, it speaks like really fast, but they understand it. For me, it sounds like Mickey Mouse is talking, but to them, this is how
Yeah.
they use the
Because they've
technology, right?
developed their cognitive, yeah. And
Exactly,
and
right. So we
and the
might be able to.
frontier, you mentioned LLMs, and right now we have the equivalent of the entirety of human knowledge as a training data set, plus synthetic
Yep.
data that has been generated by AI over the
Yep.
past 3 years. And that still is 5% of the data. This amount of data is
Yes.
still only 5% of the inputs a toddler would have gotten by year 4, because
Correct.
his experience of the world is not
Yes.
only text and language,
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
myriad of sensory and cognitive
Exactly.
inputs. And when you
Exactly.
compare, so this is where the model is still way
Yes.
behind compared to us,
Yes.
until a guy called Yann Lequin, who's a Frenchman who's headed the
Yep.
Meta
Yeah.
AI,
Yeah.
has come up with this crazy idea of not inventing an LLM, a large language model, but a world model,
Yes.
where the training
Exactly.
data will be more sensory, sound and video, and a real world experience. I don't know how he's going to emulate the sensory part of the
Yeah.
experience, but apparently that's something they're working on. I'm keeping an eye on that. That's scary.
It's interesting, but I don't know. Is he still employed by Meta? Jan
No,
LeCun?
no, no. He's got a company.
Yes.
It's called Emmy, I think.
Yeah.
I
That's
think
what I figured. But
he slammed the door when they hired a 23 something
I
to.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, depending on what funding he gets, that will be interesting to see, right? But
100 million.
that's nothing.
Well,
That's not.
I'd call it a seed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunately that's nothing for the compute that he needs for all his sensory input, right? But it is clear, right? We do have a sense that yes, there's these body of large language models that have very real capabilities right now. But we also sense that this is that small amount to that big picture that is required that makes us human. And we don't really see that gap being crossed, right? Everyone is just going onto that highway and saying like, hey, these cars are going really fast. This is A-okay, right? We can get a lot of out of this technology, and I agree with it, right? But like that robot, every time you ask him to make coffee, he needs to go looking for the coffee again because it doesn't have memory,
Of course, yeah.
right?
This is fascinating. We have amazing content to draft something really interesting. I'm so happy of this discussion. Um, I'm also happy that, past FinOps, there's a little bit of a philosopher in you, right? Outward thinking and forward thinking, and I like, the frontier type of topic. So I'm very, very happy. I hope that was a good use of your time.
It was.
I think content-wise, we're good. Unless there's more topics you want to speak about, but I think we're at time. So really up to you.
No,
Um,
it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, please share the recording. And if you want to do another interview, maybe different topics, maybe we focus
sure,
more on AI and like futures of AI
of
or
course.
something like that, right? We can do that as well.
Absolutely. And so, some people actually suggest a recurrence, maybe every
Yeah,
quarter
I'm
or
very
so.
happy with that.
That's
Yeah,
that's cool. One thing before we leave, so I'm going to generate the first draft and share that with you.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's going to be unedited.
yeah,
Once you approve, after you want, if you want to amend anything, I'll generate the actual prototype of the article also for review.
yeah.
Um, I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Just
Make sure it's okay because it will be recorded. So maybe you want to stop the
yeah, I'll
recording.
stop the recording. Thank you. So
Mhm.
that